If you haven't seen the first two lessons in this series, this one builds directly on those ideas. In the previous lessons, we talked a lot about false identity and performance based worth, but at the same time, we also cannot completely ignore realities around attraction and confidence. A common mistake people make when talking about identity is assuming the only solution is either just accept yourself completely or obsessively trying to optimize every flaw. Neither extreme is healthy. While some identity problems are based on a distorted perspective of yourself, there are also situations where people can genuinely gain confidence through growth, discipline, and basic self care. And while this should never become pride or vanity or the primary objective of life, confidence and stewardship often does affect the way people relate to others. Throughout this lesson, I'm going to use that word stewardship a lot. One example of the word appears in Ephesians. Assuming that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you. Now, in context, Paul is specifically talking about the ministry and responsibility God entrusted to him. So I'm not saying this verse means go lift weights or start a skincare routine. But the Greek idea behind stewardship is oikonomia, which carried the idea of managing or taking care of something entrusted to you. Biblically, stewardship means responsibly managing what God has entrusted to you. Your health, time, habits, responsibilities, and more all fall under that idea. And what's important is stewardship is not vanity. There's an important difference between caring for yourself and worshiping appearance. Modern culture often swings between these two extremes. Some people become obsessed with appearance and external validation. Others almost always act as if improving yourself physically or socially is shallow by default. But stewardship and self care do matter. A lot of what modern self improvement culture talks about is not automatically wrong. Realistically, many of the principles people now call looks maxing often come down to fairly normal things such as sleep, diet, discipline, posture, and general self care. Some practical improvements are also just normal stuff. Things like hygiene, taking care of your teeth, grooming, and learning how to dress in a way that fits you well personally. What's important to note is that a lot of these movements push a one size fits all method, when the reality is that's just not human nature. I remember seeing stuff online saying you need a shirt that's skin tight, when in reality, or at least for me, that just makes me feel uncomfortable. Or grooming habits saying you need to have a perfect, clean cut edges 7 days a week. Then you have people saying you're not a real man unless you're under 10% body fat, or you're not a real man unless you're over 200 pounds. A lot of that is honestly just noise. Most people eventually have to figure out through experience what works well for them personally. In many ways, a lot of this is an overreaction to how easy the modern world has made it to neglect ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually. Online, this often gets turned into obsessive hyperanalysis where people begin treating themselves like a broken project that constantly needs optimization. But part of what people are reacting to is the realization that discipline, structure, health, and responsibility genuinely affect confidence and quality of life. Interestingly, Scripture has taught many of these principles long before modern self improvement culture existed. Proverbs repeatedly speaks positively about diligence, discipline, and avoiding patterns of neglect. Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. The idea here is that neglect and passivity eventually produce destructive results over time. An example is small effort is better than none, but in many areas of life, consistent half effort and neglect eventually still weaken and damage things rather than build them well. At the same time, Scripture also creates balance around physical stewardship and personal discipline. Paul writes, "For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way." That verse creates an important balance. Physical stewardship and self care have value, but none of those things become the ultimate identity. If you want to learn the foundations for walking with God in a practical sense, I explore what this looks like in my Walking with God series. Another thing many people realize over time is that confidence often develops through action, responsibility, and experience. Some insecurities genuinely shrink as people mature, gain perspective, improve their habits, and stop constantly obsessing over small things. Even personally, when I look back at older photos of myself, a lot of the difference was not some secret formula. Some of it was simply growing up, some of it was taking better care of myself, and some of it was becoming more disciplined and intentional over time. And while appearance is objective to some degree, I genuinely do feel a lot better now than I did back then. For example, if someone is constantly living in habits they're not proud of, even if nobody else knows about them, it often affects the way they carry themselves internally. Oftentimes, a more stable identity is on the other side of removing those patterns. Another major issue is that many people spend years overanalyzing themselves while avoiding the very challenges that would help them grow. But identity problems and insecurity often grow through avoidance, and many fears begin shrinking through repeated exposure and experience. If you saw the first lesson in this series, I talked a little about how my early childhood felt and how socially underdeveloped I felt growing up. But consistently pushing myself out of my comfort zone and challenging what I did day to day genuinely changed that over time. Not perfectly overnight, but with time. And I've also been the kind of person who overanalyzes a lot, but many people never allow themselves enough real exposure to realize that a lot of things they obsess over are either exaggerated or far less important than they once imagined. There's also an important biblical principle connected to this. In context, Jesus is sending his disciples out to preach the message of the kingdom, and he tells them that some people will reject them. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. In Jewish tradition, shaking the dust off your feet was sometimes a symbolic act done after leaving Gentile territory, representing separation from what was rejected or considered unclean. So here, Jesus is telling the disciples not to carry rejection with them or to let it stop them from continuing forward faithfully. The point was that rejection does not define their identity or determine whether they continue forward faithfully. A lot of healthy confidence comes from honestly knowing you're trying to live responsibly and faithfully day by day, even when everything does not go perfectly. There's peace in knowing you did your best, and the rest can be released to God. Another dangerous pattern today is hyperfixation. People can spend enormous amounts of emotional energy obsessing over tiny appearance details, social mistakes, or how they think other people see them. But the reality is that most people are far more focused on their own problems and insecurities than we often realize. Most people are not spending all of their mental energy analyzing every flaw in someone else. Most people carry insecurities themselves, and almost everyone notices their own flaws more intensely than other people do. And if someone constantly views themselves through the lens of false identity and insecurity, then they often lose perspective entirely. Another important realization is that peace and confidence do not come from being universally liked. That is impossible. Some personalities naturally connect better with certain people. Some people will misunderstand you, and some people will simply not relate to you. And trying to become someone universally approved by everyone usually creates a fake personality. Another important thing to understand is that if you are genuinely trying to improve areas of your life, some people may not fully understand why those things matter to you, but they also may not share your same struggles, goals, or perspective on life that you do. And that's okay because people are different. What matters is learning to move toward a healthier and more grounded version of yourself because sometimes other people may say, you're fine, or you already look good, while internally you still recognize areas of your life that need more discipline or growth. And there's nothing wrong with responsibly working on those things. To close all this, a lot of people stay trapped because they approach insecurity from only one direction. Some obsess over improvement while never addressing identity. Others focus only on identity while neglecting discipline and action entirely. But healthy confidence often develops through both grounded identity and responsible stewardship. The goal is not perfection, it's becoming more stable and honest in how you live. Because growth is not about becoming someone else, it's about becoming more grounded in the person God created you to be.